Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, U.S. President Donald Trump working with Chinese President Xi Jinping to throw a lifeline to ailing telecom company ZTE. Could this be the beginning of mending frayed economic ties or another bargaining chip to gain trade concessions? Remaining signatories of the Iran nuclear deal work around the U.S. withdrawal from the agreement. Could the deal still work in the long run? That's a question mark. And the U.S. opens its embassy in Jerusalem, a decision that drew condemnation from Palestinians and their allies. Could this U.S. policy change the course of peace efforts in the greater Middle East? You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. U.S. President Donald Trump says he and Chinese President Xi Jinping are working to give Chinese telecom company ZTE, in his words, quote, a way to get back into business fast, end of quote. The Chinese Foreign Ministry welcomed the announcement and says Chinese Vice Premier Liu He will visit the United States from Tuesday to Saturday for economic and trade talks. Earlier this month, the Chinese technology company suspended its main operations after an American supply ban imposed by the U.S. government. The ban comes amid heightened trade tensions between China and the U.S.
President Donald Trump is pledging to help the Chinese telecommunications giant ZTE after the U.S. government denied it access to its American suppliers. Trump's move will likely be seen as a concession to the Chinese in the ongoing talks between Beijing and Washington to resolve a trade conflict. Last week, ZTE announced it had suspended major operations as a result of the U.S. Commerce Department's trade restrictions, prohibiting the company from purchasing American supplies. The U.S. Commerce Department had accused ZTE of violating a settlement agreement with the U.S. government. Sunday, Trump tweeted that he and Chinese President Xi Jinping are working together to give massive Chinese phone company ZTE a way to get back into business fast. Too many jobs in China lost. Commerce Department has been instructed to get it done.
We appreciate the positive statements made by the U.S. side on the issue of ZTE. We are currently working with the U.S. side on specific details by maintaining close communication. Regarding some concrete problems concerning the U.S. side, both sides will also keep in close communication.
The ban on American supplies was originally imposed for 7 years. It arose after ZTE was fined $1.2 billion for selling equipment to Iran and DPRK in violation of U.S. sanctions. The blanket ban on the use of American components threatened the company, given that it imports around 30% of its parts from the U.S. ZTE, which has more than 70,000 employees, says it bought $2.3 billion worth of U.S. goods in 2017. Its major American suppliers include Qualcomm, Intel, and Texas Instruments. When a U.S. delegation visited China recently for talks to end a trade standoff, resolution of the ZTE case was among Beijing's main demands. And if Trump does make concessions regarding ZTE, there's no indication of what he might receive in return, as the two countries continue to discuss their ongoing trade conflict.
For more insights on the latest development with ZTE and that between the United States and China, we are joined in our Beijing studio Liu Baocheng, who is the Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from University of International Business and Economics. Sir, welcome to our program. Also in Beijing, we're very happy to welcome Douglas Paul, coming all the way from Washington, D.C., Vice President of Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. It's good to have you here in Beijing, Mr. Paul.
Pleasure to be back with you, Tian Wei.
Good to see you again. Let me ask you first, Professor Liu, what does this mean, so-called get back to business fast? That's his quote coming from Mr. Trump's tweet. What does it mean for ZTE? Is it temporary, likely to be long-term? That's a big question mark.
Well, at least it's quite a relief because it's really on a tipping point, and where the tension seems to be escalating, and that gives a positive surprise to many of the speculators. But of course, it's a good news, it's good relief to ZTE that because they already have really suspended their business, closed their stock exchanges, both in Hong Kong and Shanghai, and now, taking into consideration of the 80,000 people who are working for ZTE, and not to mention many other related industries who are involved, and so hopefully we are going to see some very positive results.
Hopefully, that's the word you use.
Right.
Mr. Paul, though, hopefully, how hopeful can we be? I mean, when it comes to mid and long-term development of ZTE, not just temporarily for a few days?
Well, this, there are some, Professor Liu's mentioned the things that are important to the Chinese side. Also to the American side, there are important jobs. Lots of the components of ZTE products are made by American exporters, and Trump does not want to be seen as losing them their jobs by cutting off their market. And secondly, there's a very important Qualcomm. Qualcomm was mentioned in your lead-up. Qualcomm merger that's awaiting approval from the Chinese authorities. So there's something to be gained on the American side, too, by coming to a resolution of the punishment that was administered to ZTE.
Having stakes in each other's hands, that's a perfect way of having a negotiation. We don't want to forget that all of these latest developments happened right on the eve of the second round of talks. Chinese Vice Premier Liu He heading his way toward Washington, coming from Tuesday to Saturday, likely. Mr. Paul, do you think this could be the beginning of a, quote, constructive round? Or this is only olive branch, goodwill gestures, little things coming from two sides?
I would characterize it differently. I would say it was a precondition to having the negotiations.
Interesting. Explain, please.
That if, it would not really, to my mind, be understandable that President Xi Jinping would send his trusted aide, Liu He, to the United States to talk about a trade negotiation with the ZTE issue hanging in front of everyone. So it was necessary to get that out of the way in order to move forward.
At least temporarily.
That's right. The American side, especially in the negotiation that took place with visitors a week ago, showed signs of real confusion about what the priorities are. And I think President Trump and his people have been authorizing everything can go. Anything you want to bring up, bring up. Someone now has to make a decision about what's more important in these negotiations and what's less important.
The first round did not go as beautifully as we all wished for. I mean, we all wish for a lot of things, but obviously there are very frank exchange of views. We try to understand both sides, the bottom line from each other. But the question is, after that, what's next? The second round, Professor Liu, your perspective.
Well, I would choose that the ZTE case in the first place is really an isolated case. It's not really tied to the tariff issues that is hanging on both sides when China is also ready to retaliate. And of course, there has been a large gap during the round of talks with 7 people coming to China. And it is also good to see that there's going to be chances for further engagement, and hopefully that when the bottom lines of both sides are being better understood, and then they would really move into a constructive direction.
Oh, constructive direction. I really want to get to know more about that. Especially, what are you saying?
Definitely China is ready to open further some market access to U.S. and, of course, global participants. So we're going to further reduce the tariff, and we're going to tighten up the intellectual property protection. So that's we have a lot in common, and we are moving in that direction.
That also requires some amicable political environment, I would say, in a way. We all know that, Mr. Paul, for example, negotiation, it takes some goodwill from both sides, at least for that moment. So let me ask you about this. This is happening also on the eve of the hearing taking place regarding the U.S. future direction toward China when it comes to trade policies. Let's see who is there for the hearing. You got Best Buy, you got U.S. Steel, you also got HP. So you got companies that are retail, you got the steel manufacturers, and also technology companies supposed to be. And you got us got National Retailer Association and some of the National Association of Manufacturers as well. What do these companies, when put together, mean in a hearing?
Well, this is a chance for the Congress and administration to be exposed to those who have skin in the game. There are people who will lose because of high tariffs if they're implemented on the 301 cases, and there are people who want to see high tariffs brought in to protect their markets. So you'll be getting crossfire from people who have different points of view on what to do about the upcoming negotiations over the 301
Is it
case.
going to be a well-balanced crossfire, or the crossfire actually is going to one direction if you look at these names?
Well, I haven't seen all the names, but what I saw suggested to me there will be more emphasis on those who will be hurt by the imposition of tariffs than by those who want to see new tariffs to protect their markets.
Given that circumstances, Professor Liu, how could China respond? I mean, Vice Premier Liu He is actually there when all of these accusations could be about China is taking place.
Well, I think our Vice Premier Liu He is very experienced in international occasions. He studied in the United States and he worked with international organizations. So I think he can really play a very important role to, number one, to bring people to the truer picture. And also he's going to convince people that China is making the right type of efforts, given it's the realistic situation China is facing. So we cannot really achieve everything by consensus overnight, but we are moving towards one direction, which is further market access and better protection, and also more opportunities for multinational companies.
Of course,
in the United States.
Discussion about this gigantic topic cannot be wrapped up just within a few minutes. But because of your great contribution, we will put a pause until the next discussion. Thank you so much for being with us. Douglas Paul, stay with us for the next round of discussion. And Professor Liu Baocheng, really appreciate it. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program.